Hi, everybody, and welcome to our latest webinar, which is going to be everything about tracking your budget using ProjectTeam and ProjectTeam.com. As always, what I'll start off here is just a couple slides, and then I'm going to get right into the system. We'll spend most of our time actually clicking through the system, but I do want to give some background here as we get started. So the first slide is, what can I do in ProjectTeam? As you're going through and setting up projects, one of the most important areas of the system is the ability to import your data. So I will spend some time talking about how to import data into the system. The importing from the budget side can come from, let's say you're using an accounting system for your estimating, or you're tracking estimates in some system or whatever, and I want to be able to import that data directly to ProjectTeam, or just set up my original control budget or budget right in ProjectTeam as well. You could always do that. I'll show you ways to import areas like your account codes and also your original budget information directly into the system. We'll import about 100 items very quickly, and then we can show how all of those things relate not only to each other, but also to other areas within the projects. Next, we'll spend a lot of time in the reporting side. Reports is a very powerful feature within ProjectTeam, and you're able to kind of aggregate all of the data across your project or even projects into really nice, easy to read reports and dashboards. And what that does for you is it gives you real-time visibility into the status of your projects. Really, there's, as soon as data is entered into ProjectTeam, it's immediately available in your reporting side. And you can do really cool things like scheduling your reports, adding charts or visualizations to your reports to really call out important data and stay on top of things as quickly as they happen. And then finally, the ability to forecast your remaining costs to complete. In ProjectTeam, there's a lot of ways to track data, as I've already mentioned. You can track things like committed costs, uncommitted costs, forecasted costs, over-unders, and we'll talk about how you might set those up, what that looks like on the reporting side, and how it can be best used to make sure that you're alerted to information, again, as quickly as it's happening. So let's talk about kind of at a basic level, setting up your budget or what your budget might look like in ProjectTeam. So to start here, I have these 4 budget items: office supplies, water utilities, etc. Each of those different items has, let's say, an original budget amount tied to it. Your budget amount is kind of like your target, let's say, on the project, and that's what you're going to kind of measure your success from a financial standpoint maybe against. You've got your original budget. The next column over, I've got my amendments. Maybe that is funding changes, or some, maybe I'm pulling money from one item and putting it into another item, or maybe I just have new resources that I need to be able to add or subtract money to. Those would be called amendments within ProjectTeam. In ProjectTeam, you can lock down, once you have your budget, you can lock down the fields of your budget, so any further changes must be done through amendments, making sure that you correctly track all of that data. And then finally, in that last column called revise, that's just some simple math here saying my original plus my amendments gives me my revised budget to start. So at a very, very simple level, this maybe is what a budget would look like. When we talk about how this goes into ProjectTeam, each one of those areas or categories, let's say on the left-hand side, might be tied to some account code or cost code or budget code or whatever you want to call that code type of thing. The importance of that is now that I'm coding my line items, I can also code other areas within my projects against those line items. So let's say I have a contract, maybe I have scheduled value line items. Each SOV line item might have its own code, which goes back to my original budget. So if I have 100 scheduled value line items on my contract, each one of those, maybe even some of those are the same code, but I'm breaking them out in a way that I want them to roll up in a specific way against my budget. Same thing with change orders, payment applications. I might have multiple contracts, subcontracts, whatever it might be, can all roll up against that code. And that's the importance of that code that I'm highlighting on that left-hand side. Now that I have that thing, I can tag and easily find anything against that code. Beyond just my budget, so I've got my original, my amendments, and my revised, I also might want to track my commitments. Commitments might be things like my approved my contracts, any approved change orders, which are going to update my revised contract amount, which I want to be able to measure, let's say, against my budget, depending on my role within the project. You might also have columns, which I'm not going to show here, but I will show in a little bit, maybe uncommitted costs, maybe forecasted costs, those type of things. And that will allow you to do different math against those revised budget numbers to keep your projected budget and things like that in one place. The way, like I mentioned before, the way that I would tag commitments against my budget is using that highlighted budget code that we're seeing on the screen. And then most importantly, when I'm looking at my budget, I want to be able to very quickly understand, where are my trouble spots. So on your different budget information, once I have those codes and I'm tagging the information, and you can get as deep as you want to within the system, I'm able to tag things against that over under. So very quickly I can see it looks like I'm doing pretty well in some spots. Maybe I'm a little bit over, which is showing up in the red in some spots. And then at a summary level, do I want to group that data, or do I want to have an overall summary of all that information to know exactly, okay, it looks like in this simple example, I'm okay for about $5,000 so far. So everything that I'm doing against my budget, which is like my target, I'm tracking all those commitments, committed costs, uncommitted costs, forecasted costs, whatever it is, making sure that I am very well aware of that over, under, or target that I'm going for on this project. This obviously would be a very good thing for me to understand or keep up with on a daily basis. So there are ways in ProjectTeam not only to log in and run the budget report or view the data, drill down on the data in different ways, but you also might want to schedule this report to automatically email to myself or my important stakeholders on the project every morning, every afternoon, whatever it might be, so that everyone is always up to date and getting constantly bombarded with information that, hey, we need to look at for this, or you're doing okay in these areas. So the point of this slide is at a very high level, give you some basics about what I'm about to show in ProjectTeam, but it does kind of lay out the foundation of what we can expect and kind of setting up your budget in the columns that might be appropriate on that. One of the nice things about ProjectTeam is it's a very flexible solution. So any columns that you want to track, if we want a simpler budget than this, or we want to add 20 different columns on the right-hand side to this, it's very easy to tag all those things into your budget. And there's no one size fits all in ProjectTeam. You can kind of set this to your exact needs. And then my last slide real quick is the ability to integrate to your accounting systems. So I think in my last webinar, we talked about contracts, change orders, integrating that stuff. Same thing from the budget side. So budget is obviously equally or more important than some of those items. What you can do on the accounting side is, let's say I'm using ProjectTeam as my core project management solution. I also have, let's say, my accounting system, whether that's whatever system that you have. In some cases, let's say, like I mentioned in the beginning, I'm tracking my estimates, let's say in Sage. I have all that information, I import that. That's going to give me the account codes that might be on the project, or the budget information that's on the project. That automatically sets up the budget items in ProjectTeam, and then I start to create those commitments or transactions against that information. So the data in your systems, whether that's in ProjectTeam or in your accounting system, can move in both directions, whatever is most appropriate for your use cases. And there might be some areas that you want it to go both ways. Some is starting in your accounting to ProjectTeam, and then same thing, ProjectTeam to the accounting side in some ways as well. There are a ton of great benefits of integrating your accounting solution. The first one, of course, is that initial import of that estimates or original budget information, just really saving you time there. Of course, any kind of integration, the goal is to reduce human data entry, reduce errors, that somebody might be fat fingering that information as they're manually tagging that information from one system to the next. And then also, and probably most importantly, just increase the communication between your accounting side and your project management team. I think in a lot of cases, those are pretty siloed solutions that it's hard to find data on one side to the next, but it's all important data, especially on the project side. You might not need as much detail as you're looking at from the accounting side, but there is some data that makes decisions that I make on my project extremely important, and the ability to kind of move the information from one system to the next is obviously vital to the success of the project. So let's talk about the demo here. So if I close out of my slides and open up ProjectTeam, I'm going to jump into the system and kind of get right into the budget management piece. I'll skip the general navigation. There's other videos or webinars that you can listen to get some of that more documentation, general navigation pieces. So I'm just going to jump right into the budget. So I'm just going to use my email address and my password to log in. At the top of my screen, I'm going to go straight into this first webinar sample project. Okay, this is a brand new project I set up right before this call. There's really nothing in it at this point. I could have set things up in a project template and then clone that template to create my new project. But in this case, I'm starting like if I would on day one. There's really nothing inside this project. The other point I want to make really quickly, and I won't spend too much time on this, but if I wanted to manage information from a financial or budgetary standpoint outside of a single project, and I want to do that kind of at a portfolio or a program level, I can also do that, and that would be more in the company area, not necessarily jumping into a project. But for this call, I am going to jump right into a project. In this area, I can see my favorite form types at the top. I've got budget amendments, budget items. I'm going to focus a lot on those things: change orders, contracts, pay-ups, PCOs, all that good stuff. And we'll kind of talk about some of those as we go. But to get started, let's say I'm just setting up this project and I'm a project administrator. I'm actually going to go to this project admin area. And I notice in this document setup, I've got an area for account codes. So on a brand new project, I don't have any account codes, which makes sense, but I might want to set something up. So I have two tabs, my account code list, and since I don't have that, first I need to set up my code structure. My code structure, if you remember from my PowerPoint, looks a certain way, and that's what I'm going to be tagging everything to match up in the right lines of my budget. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and create a brand new segment here. So my account code might have multiple segments. This might already be established in your accounting system, or you can set something new here. And if you were integrating, you can map that data accordingly. But let's say that I've got my first segment is a code. It's 2 characters, and I'm going to have a delimiter of a dash. You can really set this up exactly to match your systems, but this makes sense for me. And then maybe I've got something called a type. Maybe that's 5 characters. And then after my type, I don't need a delimiter. It's my last segment there. So I'm going to say 2 and 5 and say next. Once I do that, I do have a little example here showing my 2-5 character segment. That looks good. If I edited these or added these in the wrong order, I could always reorder them, which just opens up a spot where I can drag and drop to reorder those to make sense. In a case where I might have 10 different segments and I've got a very complicated code structure, that's 100% okay in ProjectTeam, and the reordering might make a little bit more sense there as I'm kind of making sure that that all lines up and looks great. Once I have my code structure, I can go back to my account codes. This is telling me now that I don't have any account codes set up. If I wanted to manually start to add account codes, I could just say new. You'll notice this kind of data masking here is going to match the segment layout that we just set up. So I could say, if I just type in all 9s here, you've got that 2 characters, a dash, and then the 5 characters after that. And then I can add a description to those account codes. In lieu of going through and editing or adding all of those one by one, you can also import. So let's say that I already have an accounting codes set up. It's a standard that I use. Maybe I built that into my template, or maybe I have it in some other system. I'm just going to go ahead and import that data. Like a lot of other areas within ProjectTeam, there's a really nice little 3-step wizard here for importing. I can download a template, which is going to give you those segments. But since I've already done that, I can just upload my account codes. I do have that right here, and I'll just upload. What's going to happen is it's going to take all the data from that spreadsheet, whether it's a CSV or whatever, import the data. Looks like I have about 90 of those. Find any duplicates or errors that you might find. It's going to list those errors for you here. Looks like all my data was pretty good, of course. So I'm going to go ahead and say view my account codes at this point. So at this point now, I've added my code structure, that 2-5. I added my account codes, and it's showing up there. And now I've got this nice list here. If I needed to make any changes, I could always go in here and edit this data, maybe something imported incorrectly, or I made a mistake, fat fingered something. I can always edit or delete items as long as those things aren't used. Now that I have my account codes in, I might go over to my budget and start to tag numbers to those codes. Okay, so this is an area that I'm not tagging my original budget right now to these account codes, because these account codes might just be generic, and I'm going through and I'm tagging those things across everything, not necessarily to a budget. I probably should have a budget for each one of these, but maybe I don't. Maybe I'm tagging those to other areas of the system. So to tag your numbers to these account codes, I'm just going to go over to my budget items. Here I have, again, just a blank log because I just started this project. I don't have anything in here. I can go ahead and create a new budget item. In here, I can tag any of those account codes to my new budget item and put in whatever values that I want, which will give me the field updates here. So I've got a $900,000 budget for that pre-construction item. Just like I did from the account codes, I could manually go in and add these one by one. Or if I cancel this, again, you have the ability to import. So if I'm coming from, let's say, my estimates, or I've done estimating, I can upload an import of my budget items. That'll go in there, take a couple seconds, look through all the data, and then give me my, in this case, I've got 91 or 97 budget items now showing up in my log. Once I add all that information, I get this nice clean log showing me my subject, original amounts, amendments that we kind of talked about from our slideshow there. Any pending amendments, are these items approved, etc. Just like any other log, I can always go in here and configure my log to say, I don't really care about pending information at this point. So I'll go ahead and turn those things off. I can save that, and my log is going to refresh and only show me the data that I want to see. So you can always turn off or on different columns of your different logs, however that makes sense. The other nice thing about the budget area is that I can go into each one of these budget items. I can review the information, and then at some point I can approve the information as well. And I can go one by one and approve these different items. The point of that is, let's say it goes through some workflow or there's some review or approval process as we're kind of setting up our budget. At some point, we're going to say, hey, I don't want any more changes to this budget unless they're tracked through some amendment. And to do that, we're going to lock this thing by using the approve budget items. If I do want to lock, but I'm not ready to approve, the other option that you have under here is always that I could lock form fields. And I'll go ahead and do that just to show you. It's just going to give you this little lock icon that says, hey, no users can make changes to this item at this point, except a project administrator could go in here, unlock, make the adjusted changes, maybe eventually approve this thing, etc. Although I could go through and approve each one of these line by line, the other option that you have is I could click multiple of these, or maybe even all of them, and then approve them all at once. Okay, so if I do that, it's going to take me kind of to a review screen showing me all the items that I just selected. Maybe I want to add an approval date of the 11th here, and then confirm, and that would approve everything that I just did. That'll lock all the fields, make it sure that no other additional changes can be made except through the amendment side. Before I do that, I'm going to go back one more time. The final piece that I want to show real quick on the budget items side is if I go into any of these different items here, I see kind of some generic fields, and I'm going to go ahead and unlock the fields since I did lock that. I see my subject, the account code related to that thing, an original budget, and it looks like I've got no amendments going on, so zeros in both of these little areas, saying that there's been no amendments, which makes sense because we just imported our original items. On the second tab here is going to also show kind of a summary level of all your amendments, and I'll go through how to create amendments and what they look like back on the form. But before I do that, I just want to kind of point out, I know one question is sometimes is about forecasting and be able to plug numbers in, and you can include those in your logs, etc. One nice way to do a forecast maybe, or add forecasting numbers and then eventually be able to report on that information is in the configuration area. So again, project admins, Could go in here, configure my form fields. Let's say that I want to add kind of a forecasting table under there. Maybe I do a monthly forecast review, which I review each one of these items, kind of talk about things that I believe are going to be happening but haven't really been tracked yet, et cetera. And I can go in and add those things right to the form. So in this case, I'm going to go into my customized form fields. Here's the properties level of my budget item. I can say I want to add a brand new field. We go into a collection field, which is kind of a collection of rows and columns that I might be wanting to track my forecasting. This isn't needed to be done, but it's a good example, and I think it's an appropriate time to kind of show how you would customize forms like your budget items here. And let's just call this as my forecast information. Do I want to include a row number in my chart? Let's say yes. And now I can start to add new columns which can be tracked against it. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and say that I want to add a forecast date. This is going to allow me to kind of track as I'm changing forecast amounts, how on or off was I, and for the historical tracking. So let's just say my forecast date. I want to put some help text in there for myself. I'll go through and say next. Maybe my forecasted amount. So let's say my forecast to complete, what do I think there? Do I want to include a total? It doesn't really make sense to include a total here because I'm going to be doing this in a table view. So I'm going to say next, and then one more time, maybe I just want to add some general notes. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and say notes here. Okay. Again, this is really an example of me setting something up, let's say within my project template. I've added my account codes, now I'm adding my budget items. When I look at a budget items data here now, I also have this new table or collection that we just added that I can start to add information. So let's say on the 11th, I'm forecasting that there's still $100,000 of stuff that might be happening here. I can put in some notes and add that. Over time, I might have a separate forecast, let's say a month from now, that says, we are a little bit more understanding of where we're going, and so there's $85,000 of forecasted amount left against this budget item. So a good way to kind of track that information in the system, we could report off of that, check trends, historical tracking, et cetera, make sure that we're on target and accounting for everything that might not be created in a document just yet. So I'm going to say that. So at this point, I've really looked at the form view. So we imported our account codes. We looked at the budget items. I do want to quickly go over what would be like to create a budget amendment. So let's say that this thing goes through some workflow. We approve it. Are you sure you want to approve it? Yes. That's going to lock the fields again. It tells me it's approved. If I go back to my log view, we can very clearly see the items that have been approved in here as well. If I needed to create a budget amendment against that builder risk, I could go to the amendments, say new. This is going to create a new amendment, so I'll just say amendment 002 builder. Let's say safety, safety issues or something. Put in some notes, and then go ahead and create some amendment items. Here I might say, I think I said the builder's risk. Let's say there's $25,000 in there. Okay. I can also add other line items. Let's say, whatever I want to do here. So let's just say automation or something, or let's just do safety. And let's say we want to take $25,000 away from that one. Okay, so I've added 25 and taken 25. That's going to give me my net amount of 0. All right. And when I save this now, that amendment has been created against those two different types of budget codes. So if I go over to my budget items, that has not been approved, so I'm going to have to configure my log to show those columns. But we'll see very clearly from my log in a second here, now I've got pending budget amendments of $25,000 showing up here. And then somewhere down here, I've got that negative $25,000 showing up here. So those budget amendments can tie to your budget, and you can see that all from the log. If I actually go into the view and check the budget amendments lists here, I see every pending and every approved amendment against that original code. Okay. All right, so these are kind of the basics of setting up your budget, and at a high level overview, how those things kind of work together, especially from a budget items and budget amendment standpoint. From now, I'm going to jump into another project that has more data in it. So this webinar example number 2. I've got a lot more data, so contracts, change orders, etc. And we're going to go over some of these other areas within your budget. So if I click into report side, at this point, I've really looked at the forms, but I might also have some really nice reports that we want to kind of go over that give me kind of a higher level view of exactly how my project is doing across these different items. I went into reports, I ran a single report. In this case, I've got this really nice financial status report, let's say. I have, a lot of the data that I set up on this project is exactly what was on the other project. So I've got the 2 characters limited by the 5 characters, and I'm actually grouping by that first two character segment, 01, 02, 03, etc. In this financial report, I've set it up to show things like my logo. I am pulling that data from my original budgets, my amendments, which we looked at, this current revised budget, pending amendments, all this kind of stuff is coming similar to what our log look like. However, I'm also showing over here some commitments, let's say committed cost, uncommitted cost, and then projected cost, and then I also have an over under. In this view, very clearly on the left-hand side, I'm showing this little dot here that says, hey, watch out for this item, and it's going to correspond to something that might be over on this right-hand side. Within each of these different groupings, we're going to show a total of the over under as well. And we're showing not only totals at the end of the report, but subtotals within each category of this report. Like I mentioned when we looked at the PowerPoint screen, you can set up these different reports to show any data that you want. So the reporting tool is extremely flexible. The other nice thing about this is each one of these can be drill downable. So let's say I'm looking at this project signage. I might actually want to dig right into project signage. I can click on that and get right into this budget item just from a click away. I'll go ahead and X that out. The other nice thing is, let's say this one here, it looks like I've got committed costs of $30,000 against this offsite parking and storage. I can actually click on that number to drill down into the information and see committed costs on this actual contract, telling me that line item number 7 and 10 is linked to that budget code, and it's giving me that $30,000. If I want to jump quickly into that, I can just click. Really, you can set this up to click anywhere in your form here, but now I've jumped right into my contract. If I look down at my schedule values, I see line item 7 and 10 are both linked to that offsite parking and storage area, giving me my eventual $30,000. Okay, so really in your reports, all your dashboards can tie all of this information together to give you a really, really clear picture and make sure that you're always up to date on the latest and greatest from that information. Go back here. Another question that we get a lot is the ability to export this information. So this is one example of, let's say, a budget report. You can export this to lots of different formats. One of the nice things is if I export it, let's say, into Excel or Word, it's going to give me the data as it looked from when I set it up in the system. So here's an Excel spreadsheet now. Let's say I need to take this out of the system and do whatever I want with it. It's going to look exactly like it looked like when I ran this thing out of ProjectTeam.com. Exit out. The other area that is another example really quickly that's going to be very related to this example. Let's say I've got this other report here that I want to kind of clearly show data, let's say from a graphics standpoint, or maybe that last report was a little bit too in-depth from just what I want to look at. So I want to collapse all that data and to be able to just see summary level information. You can do all that in your reporting tool. One thing that I want to point out here, and maybe the importance of being able to show information in a graphical way, is if I'm looking at this data, most of this looks pretty good. I mean, that red is my budget, yellow is my current with the amendments in there, and then projected would be in green. I can manipulate this data to show or hide information as I want, so I can always interact with my charts. But in this case, if I turn off current, I can see my budget was in red and my projected is in green. So this number 13 looks way off to me, okay? I don't know if I'm looking at the numbers here that I'd be able to clearly see that, but looking at this graph, it looks pretty off. So that's one of the nice things about introducing graphics into your reports or in your dashboards, is that you can kind of call out information that might be most important. If I want to see what the heck is going on with 13, I can actually go down here and open up number 13, and see that, you know, this item here for a sauna was originally budgeted for $10,000, but we're allocating $5 million to that. So that's obviously very off. If I wanted to, I could drill down into that to get back into that item, make the appropriate adjustments if somebody fat fingered something, or kind of check out all the history of what's making up that $5,000 or $5 million issue. From another standpoint, you know, on these things, you could always expand all, collapse all, and now I'm back to that report that showed all that good data. Again, I can export this information to whatever format that I want. It's going to include my different graphs. And then finally, the last thing that I want to kind of quickly touch on, if I go, you know, if we're in this project, the other nice thing about ProjectTeam, if we looked at those reports, we saw committed costs, uncommitted costs, forecasted costs, etc. You can actually tag, since I have those account codes to any form that you want. So if I go to something like my RFI view, in this case, I've got RFIs. Maybe RFIs had a cost impact on them. I might want to say that cost impact is actually, you know, tracked somewhere against my budget. How do I do that? I got to add an account code so that it links in the appropriate place on that budget report. So from this view here, I do have a cost impact. If I view an RFI, you can see there's really no account codes added in here, but that's okay because ProjectTeam is fully configurable. I can just add an account code field, which is going to link it back to that budget. So all I have to do is go in here, say configure, add new field. One of the field options you have is an account code. We can call this thing anything that we want, but to be consistent, let's just say account code and give field level permissions, but I'll just say okay there. Now, next time I go to this RFI number 23, or really any RFI that I want to see, I always have the ability down here to tag this item to an account code going forward. Again, the importance of that is now I can tag that, or I can go against my budget items in any way that I want to see that. Okay, so your budget reports, your budget information can account for all of the data across your projects to really give you a very accurate forecast. Obviously, giving you that information as quickly as possible from an over/under standpoint is going to really help on your projects. All right. So kind of go back to my closeout here. So we have a bunch, you know, I think this is probably the 4th webinar in the series of webinars that we've been doing so far. We have a bunch coming up through at the end of the year. You can always check our upcoming webinars by going to that resources area and checking out our webinar schedule. From a next step standpoint, I think there's a ton of people on this webinar, which is really great. Obviously, a lot of people are coming from different steps in your process, whether you just want to kind of learn more about ProjectTeam in general. You can always download our buyer's guide, evaluate more areas within the system, not only budgets, contracts, documentation, reporting, all that good stuff. There's a lot of videos and downloads that you can have. And then eventually, if you wanted to schedule a demo or set up a one-on-one call with us, we're always happy to do that as well.